Hey everybody, hope everyone can hear. We're going to go ahead and start the webinar, the OSR Invoice Listing Report and GL Expense and Budget Reports. So today we have yours truly, Chris Minter. I'm an instructional designer and trainer for Connect Carolina and Infoport. Perhaps you've maybe had me in class teaching you how to do various finance transactions. We also have Celia Gravely. She's a Huron consultant from the Office of Sponsored Research, and she's going to be here to help me answer the tough questions that I don't know. So hopefully Celia can save me if I get a little stuck. We also have a couple other BAs in the room that might be chiming in depending on your questions. So the way this webinar is going to work today is I've got, as you can see, a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to follow up with a little bit of question and answer. So you may have noticed that there is a chat window available to you. So we've opened that up so you can submit your questions. You can submit your questions at any time, but we're going to try to wait to hold off answering the questions toward the end. So we have our moderator, Rebecca, who's going to be taking your questions, and we're going to answer them in the order that we receive them. So feel free to answer questions. We have a whole hour, so it should give us plenty of time to answer anything that may come up during the webinar. Okay, so generally what today's topics are going to be is we're going to do a brief discussion of the difference between the GL's actuals ledger and budget ledgers. It'll help you understand sort of some significant features of these reports that might be new to you. We're going to talk about the new OSR Invoice Listing Report, and then we've got two reports, OSR GL Expense and Budget Reports. They're similar, they're just a little different in terms of how you get them started. So we're going to hit all of those in the course of the webinar. So as I was saying, we're going to start with a brief review of the commitment control ledgers versus the GL actual ledger. I will tell you this is not meant to be an exhaustive discussion of this. I do an all-day budgets class where we spend maybe an hour talking about these, but in a nutshell, I think we can talk about sort of what this means for the reports you're going to see. So when we talk about commitment control ledgers, we're talking about basically the budget ledgers. Sometimes people refer to these in sort of tech speak, they'll call them the KK ledgers, which actually stands for commitment control, not Krispy Kreme. So when you see things like KK ledger, commitment control, we're really kind of talking about budgets. So you might hear those terms sort of mixed together. So the ledgers are actually based on your budget. So we're not talking about actual money, we're talking about things that have been budgeted. So there's a difference there. You know, the GL is going to have what's actually been spent, whereas the budget ledger is going to be, what we plan to spend. It's going to have your encumbrances, your pre-encumbrances, things like that. So it's quite a bit different. And this is not the ledger we use. These aren't the ledgers we use to do reporting because the state and external groups, they don't really care about our requisitions and things that are sort of in flux. They want to know, what have you actually spent? What have you actually taken in? So there's a big difference there. Now, on the flip side, we have the GL actuals ledger, and that's going to be based upon your completed, posted, all the way through finalized transactions. So when something's been all the way through the system, like the vendor has their money and everything has processed. That's what we call posting and completed. So this is the book that we use to report on. So that is everything that's actually happened. So just kind of keep in mind that we're talking a lot today. You'll see about things that are based on actuals that have gone through. So that's a big difference with these reports. So keep that in mind. Okay, so just another little review here of the way your transactions will work, and I think this is a great slide. It really helps you understand sort of where things hit. So you take like a typical transaction. You've got a voucher that you're going to put in, and you're going to go create the voucher, and that would be the first step. You're going to go in, you're going to put in what should actually go on, it should get paid by the voucher. You're going to go through an edit step. It's going to make sure that the chart field string that you put in is correct. It's going to make sure that your accounting date is correct. It's going to make sure there's nothing just generally wrong with whatever you're trying to put through. And then when we get to the third step, you probably, if you've done any transactions, you probably had to budget check them. So the budget checking stage is going to do two things, and I think a lot of people don't understand that it does more than just check to make sure you have money. Not only is it going out to make sure you have money, but it's actually going to write to the commitment control ledgers or to the budget ledgers what you're planning on spending. So people can go look at the balances and see sort of how much money you have left before that transaction gets all the way down the line. Now, of course, after you submit that transaction in, it's going to be some approval stops, 1, 2, 3, 4, how many ever approval stops it needs to go through. And then finally, when it gets to the posting process, that's when those transactions are going to hit that GL actuals ledger. So once again, you can see the difference on a transaction where it's going to hit one set of ledgers first, and then it's not going to hit the GL until the final step. Okay, so let's talk about these new OSR reports just sort of in general before we kind of drill down to them. As I've been saying, these reports are going to be based on what is actually posted to the system. These are the transactions that are in the general ledger, which is the official book of record. All the expenditures on these reports have been approved and finalized. And the balances, as I was saying before, aren't affected by non-fully processed transactions. So things that are in flux, even if you know eventually down the line they're going to get posted, they're not going to really show up in these reports because we're only dealing with the posted transactions. So let's go ahead and hit the first report. This is the new OSR Invoice Listing report. So what we have here is we have a report that's going to show you all the invoices that have been processed through the Connect Carolina billing system for OSR for a given project, contract sponsor, or principal investigator. Those are actually the ways you can search on it, which I'm going to show you in my little demo coming up here in just a second. It's going to be based on the actual posted transactions to the GL. It's going to show you all the invoices created in the system since Go Live back in October of 2014. Invoices that were billed before that, they were coming from other systems. We were going through our transition and things like that. So you might need to check with OSR if you have questions about those. And I would like to mention that this is a SAS Web Report Studio report in InfoPort, located on the OSR Campus Reports tab. So you do need to go into InfoPort to access this, not Connect Carolina. So I want to make sure I mention that. Excuse me. So in terms of finding this report, we took a couple of screenshots here from InfoPort. So if you're familiar with InfoPort at all, you should kind of recognize some of these buttons here on the screen. But I'll log into InfoPort and I'll have to click on Finance first. I'm going to get to the Finance section. And then once I come in there, I'll be on this Department Accounting tab that you see in the middle picture. And there'll be a Grants tab that you can click on. Once you click on that, you'll actually have two sub-tabs. So you do a little bit of digging, but if you're familiar with InfoPort, this should be not so hard to find for you. And then eventually you're going to want to click on the OSR Campus Reports tab. Now once you get in there, there's actually more than two reports in there. There's several, but the one that we're trying to show you today is the OSR Invoice Listing report. So that's what you'll click on right there when you want to launch this report in InfoPort. So once you bring up the actual report, now this isn't the whole screen, I kind of took a little bit of a screenshot of it, but the way you search for the report you want to run is you can actually enter in the contract number if you know it, the project ID, which is pretty much how I do it. You can enter in the sponsor's name or the principal investigator, or we call them the PIs. Now, what I've showed you down here at the bottom is just the way you can actually search on the project field. And one thing that you need to kind of keep aware of is you'll see a listing of various projects in this box down here, but it only shows like the first 100. So unless you're really lucky, it's probably not going to show up in that box. So you'll probably have to click our good friend, the lookup icon. Some people call it the magnifying glass. You'll click that icon, that'll let you search on all the projects out there so you can type in your number exactly how it is. So let's say I click that magnifying glass, and I'm going to get a box that's going to pop up like this. And what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to have to search for that project ID. So what I've done in this example is I've gone in and I've typed in this project ID, which is 5030262, and in order to make this work, I'll click the search button, and once I do, it'll find it and it'll pop it. Well, I didn't do a little square around it, but it'll pop it around right here. It'll put it in this box of ones you've searched for, and then what I can do is either I can double click on this project ID, or as I'm showing you here on the screenshot, I can actually click this little plus arrow, and it's going to move it over to the selected side. So you can actually select more than one. So I've only selected one, but I could throw 2 or 3 over there, and it's going to be all the ones that I want to see in the report. And then once I do that, see it sitting there, I'm going to go ahead and hit select down at the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to close this window, and then I'm going to come out to this bigger screen, and I'm going to hit a link that says View Report. And that's all you need to do to run the report. You pretty much make all your selections here in this box. Now once I do View Report, this is where all the magic happens. We actually get to the report that I ran. So what I tried to do is kind of find a representative one that will give you an idea of what you'll see in terms of the columns and the rows. This one actually had more than 2 rows, but I just kind of showed you the first 2 so I could fit it in on the slide. I had a little limited real estate issue here, and you'll notice that there's kind of 2 rows of the table. Imagine that just being all one big row. I couldn't quite fit it in on the slide, so where it cuts off with reference award number on the first header row, it would actually continue with PI ID, PI name, and department ID. And you'll see it real quick when you actually run the report, but I just wanted to make sure you realize it's not going to quite show like this. And then just going across the columns, I think you'll recognize a lot of these headers, but I just want to go over them to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page of understanding what we're looking at here. Obviously, important information like the invoice and the invoice date are going to be in those first 2 columns, so you can see those invoice numbers in the invoice column and the dates that they were invoiced. We also have information about the sponsor. So we have sort of an internal sponsor ID that we use. You can see for that those records are 5285. But if you don't know what that sponsor ID is, luckily we have the sponsor name right beside it. So I can see it's the NIH National Institute of Neurological D. I'm sure it's like diseases or something, but I can't see it all. One thing you can actually do is, since it's a screenshot, I can't do it, but you can actually widen these columns out and do some other things if you can't quite see it the way you want it. Now right here, I have information about the project itself. In addition to seeing the project ID, I also have the contract number that's associated with it. And luckily, once again, I actually have a description of the project, so I can make sure I'm looking at the right thing in case I miskeyed in the project ID, which of course I didn't, but it can happen. Right here, I can actually see the dates that the invoice is covering and the invoice amount. So you can see, like in that second row, that invoice was covering July 1st of 2013 through July 31st of 2013, and that invoice amount was $28,504.63. We also have a reference award number. That is the number that the sponsor uses to track things. So that's another number that might be important with you to you if you're trying to communicate with them about which project you're talking about. We've got information about the PI. So you'll see that we've got the PI's ID, which you guys probably call the PID, and we have the PI's name sitting there. We also have information about the department and the department description. It's pretty basic stuff. And then, what else can you say? This is where they're billing it to. So this is going to have either an address, or in some cases it might have an email address in there, sort of depending on the situation. But basically that'll be their contact information regarding that invoice. So do you have any things you want to add about that report, or should we go ahead and move on?
One of the keys about the report is sometimes you have a single invoice that covers multiple projects. So when you pull that invoice, you'll need to be careful to review that invoice amount, because it may be that it's not what you expected it to be. It may be that it was $10,000 for one project on that invoice and $5,000 for another project on that invoice. But if you pull that information by project, you may not get the sum total of the invoice. So it'll be very important to think through exactly how your award is being managed from a billing perspective. If you have 5 projects and we're doing an invoice that's a cumulative of all of those 5 projects, then you may want to think about running this particular report by the contract number, because that way you would get the correct billed amount for the contract for each invoice value. Great.
All right. So with that, we are going to move on to our next set of reports here. We'll talk about the OSR GL expense and budget reports. So what we're dealing with here is the budget balances on these reports are going to be based on approved, finalized, posted transactions. You know, we keep repeating that, but that's what we're dealing with here. To the GL actuals ledger through a specific fiscal year and period. So when I talk about periods, of course, I'm usually talking about months. You know, like period 1, period 2, period 3, those kinds of periods. Yes.
One more note on this, these are reportable transactions, and that's an important thing for everyone to think about, because as we know, we have some transactions that run through our ledger that are not expenditures that are reportable. An example of that would be a residual transfer or a cash advance request, reconciliation. Those types of accounts are not reportable to our sponsor because they are not accounts that we bill to our sponsor. So it's important to think about what you're asking for and looking for. We do plan to release an update to this report that will include all accounts, not just reportable accounts, and that's probably sometime in the next couple of weeks or so. We should have that out for you, and it'll be very clear about the difference between these 2 reports. Again, this report that we're discussing today is reportable transactions, billable transactions.
Great. So when I say we were doing 2 reports, we have sort of 2 versions of this report. And one lets you search on the project ID and one's on the contract number. So when we actually go to run the report, you're going to see we're going to the same place every time, but you're going to get to select between 2 of them. Each report is going to display OSR expenditures grouped by the type of expense. This is actually based on the invoice tree. If you know about trees, that's what we're talking about. But you can kind of think of them just kind of grouped together by similar type. And if you run a report for a previous fiscal year and period, the information is going to be valid as of that year and period. So continuing on, if you run a report for a period that hasn't closed, then the data won't be final for the month, just something to keep in mind. The data on these reports is used for OSR financial reports and invoices provided to the sponsors. This is the only data used for sponsor reports. And the OSR ledger data is not finalized and is no longer used to create reports and invoices for sponsors. This report is a BI publisher report in Connect Carolina. So we're kind of switching gears here. You'll see this in a second. You actually will access this directly within Connect Carolina, not in InfoPort. So hopefully you'll have a chance to look at our documentation. We'll show you where that is, and you could review this slideshow. But if you're not thinking about it, you might try to go to the wrong place and look for it and go, where is it? They're actually in 2 different systems. And as I just said, it's not located in InfoPort. Okay, so in Connect Carolina, this is how you're actually going to get to it. So you would click on your finance menu up at the top of the screen. You would scroll down and find the reporting tools folder. You're going to look for BI Publisher, and then you're going to finally find the Query Report Viewer. So hopefully, once you've done this a couple times, if you forget how to get there, you can just bookmark that page and make it a lot easier. Yeah, make it a favorite. So once I get here, once I find our report, there's actually a cool little trick you can do to find it. You can actually go into where the report name, where you type the report name in, and if you type in NC_OSR and then click the search button, you'll end up finding the two reports that we're talking about today. So that's what you see in the screenshot below. So you can see they're slightly different named. One says NCOSR GLCT, so think of that as contract, and NCOSR GLPJ, not pajamas, it's project. And you can actually see it there in the name of the report. So either one of these reports, you're going to run them the same way, but just keep in mind that when the box pops up, it's either going to ask you for a contract number or it's going to ask you for a project number. So if you don't know one or the other, you'll either need to find it out or choose a different report. So once I decide to actually run the report, I'll go ahead and click one of these View Report hyperlinks, and what will happen is it's going to pop me open a box, just as promised. So a box will pop open in the middle of the screen, and you have to put in a project ID, a fiscal year, and a period. So that's what I did for this one. I put in project 5030262, fiscal year 2017, and period 4, which corresponds to October. So I just wanted to see what things were looking like that month, which is now last month. It's pretty crazy. So there it is. I click OK, and boom, there's my report. So that actually is pretty easy to get going. You just have to know what you're looking for. Nothing too tricky there. And I think you'll probably be able to figure out, generally what's shown in this report. But I'm going to go through column by column just to make sure everyone's totally clear on what these columns are showing you. Sure.
Before we do that, I want to remind everybody that even though we're in November, October has not closed. So if you run this report today, prior to the month being closed in the ledger, it may or may not include all of the transactions. We are currently today and for the next couple of days completing the posting of all of the journals and transactional information for the month of October. And that's why we talked earlier and said if you run this prior to month end, to the close of the month, you may not have all of the transactions you expect. So just be sure you're cognizant of when the month really does close.
Okay, great. And that actually reminds me of another important point. You'll probably have to wait till tomorrow to actually run this report because they're still tweaking something this afternoon, and I think the best idea is just wait till tomorrow to run it. So if you're an eager beaver and you're already trying to find it, you may not see it out there. So don't get all disappointed and give up. Just check again tomorrow. And then I've got some more information coming up that's going to talk about what to do if tomorrow you go in and you still don't see it and you know your friends got it, how you actually will get access to the report. So we'll make sure you're all clear on that. But just talking about the report here in general. So I have a number of columns. This column is labeled expense node, but this is what we were talking about, those groupings based on that invoice tree. So you can see generally the category would be like salaries that we're dealing with this particular set of rows. Now, you look here, if you work with this stuff enough, you'll probably recognize these account numbers. I can see that first one, the 510,000. That's your roll-up value for your personnel there, and then I can see the detail accounts there going down the page, EPA non-teach on campus and EPA non-teach student monthly, and so on and so forth. So if you haven't looked at one of these, it can be kind of confusing because you're like, well, why, when I come over here past the description, why is there a budget on one line and there's not budgets on all the other lines? Well, the budget is put on the personnel cost row, but you're spending out of these other accounts that you see listed in the life-to-date expenses column. So right here, I can actually see what's coming out of that budget right there. So if I go back one, my budget is $1,179,575, but then all of my expenses that are coming out of that are $1,146,657.93. So as I go across that orange line there, I can do the math. I can subtract that from that, and that's how I'm ending up with this available balance right here, the $32,917.07. Now the last two columns, you're going to have a column for your fiscal year expenses. So apparently we did not have any in this example, any in this fiscal year so far. That's why it's totaling 0. So those other expenses came from another fiscal year. And then we also, since we didn't have anything for this fiscal year, we're not going to have anything for this period. So you would expect if you had been spending this fiscal year or in the period that there could be some totals there as well. And then as you keep going down the page, it's just the same idea. I mean, here we have all of your fringe benefits grouped together, rolling up to 515,000. We've got one for this, I guess it's contract services. I'm sorry, I didn't research what that one meant. And then we've got one for supplies here. So once again, this should look fairly familiar to you, but I just wanted to over-explain it, if nothing else, so you understand what exactly you're seeing on this report. So do you have anything else to say about this before we go on? Okay, so we're all good on this report. So just to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far before I get into the access portion of this, I'm just going to keep on saying it. These are based on what's actually posted to the system. The transactions are in the GL, which is the official book of record. The expenditures on these reports have been approved and finalized, and balances on these reports aren't affected by transactions that haven't been fully processed or approved or those kinds of things, except in those cases where you look at them too late. You're looking at late in the month, and like Celia was saying, they haven't quite gone through, but it's not going to be based on like encumbrances and pre-encumbrances and things like that. Okay, so the next thing you're going to be excited about is how do I actually go see these reports? The OSR Invoice Listing report, if you already have access to that OSR Campus Reports tab that I showed you, then you should have this already. Now if you get in there and you're expecting it and you don't have it, don't despair, just talk to your InfoPort administrator and they'll submit a help request to make sure you get your access. We did discover that there's a little sort of fluke with Internet Explorer. Now, if you already use like Chrome or Firefox, you're not going to run into this. I kind of tested a couple of them, but I did get this problem with IE. When I tried to go in, I got an error when I tried to run the report. So we do have a fix listed there. You would just need to go to the Tools menu, choose Internet Options, and then there's a check mark box that says Enable Protected Mode. And it even says right below it, you'll just need to restart your browser, and then once you restart it, lo and behold, you'll run the report again, and everything works great. So just keep that in mind. If you're getting stuck there, that's something you can probably fix yourself without putting in some kind of help request. Now, as for the OSR GL expense and budget report, that's the one that's not quite ready for prime time. It'll be available tomorrow. This is the report that's in Connect Carolina, not InfoPort. And once again, here's the path we actually use to access the report, and then there's the two names of the reports that you'll see when you actually search it. Remember, I searched it by just typing in NC_OSR, and I got those two reports, and I can tell the difference between the one where I search for contracts versus the one I search for projects. If you don't have access to one of these reports, you need to contact your access request coordinator, who will submit an access request through the access request tool. So just please go through the procedures that we've talked about to get access. It'll go a lot faster than if you try to put in some kind of ticket yourself. They'll know what to ask for and make sure you get the right reports available to you. All right, so we've got some resources out there for you to use to actually run these reports. I'm actually going to put this PowerPoint. Actually, the PowerPoint's already online. I've already posted it, and there's a link to actually get to that PowerPoint here that you could click. Or you could go search it. We've got two references right here that you can actually go to that will take you directly to it. We're also going to post the webinar on CC Info in a couple of days. So it takes a couple of days for us to download this recording and get it processed, but we'll be sending out another communication to you to let you know that it's out there. So if for some reason you were having trouble hearing it today, or you just thought it was so good you want to listen to it again, share it with your friends, or whatever you want to do, we'll have this available for you to listen to at a later date. So that's pretty much my spiel here. We've got plenty of time for questions, so Rebecca's taking your questions, and she'll be reading them off, and hopefully Celia or one of our other BAs in the room can answer them.
So the first question came in from Marissa. She does not have BI Publisher in her reporting tool. How can we get access to this? How can we get access to this feature?
Access to BI Publisher is being rolled out tonight, tomorrow morning. Everyone on campus will have it.
And you should have the 2 reports as well.
Absolutely.
So that should not be a problem. We decided to do the webinar first. We were worried that if we rolled out that access and didn't tell anyone how to use it, they would get frustrated. It can be kind of strange to go into the first time without having some understanding of how to, at the very least, find the report you're looking for.
Okay, I believe you addressed this question, but just to say it again, Monica would like to know if she'll be able to obtain a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, so it's already out there. You can go out there and just search on it. You can just do OSR reports PowerPoint, or just search PowerPoints on CC Info, you'll find it. Usually those, when we put new things out on our website, it can be a little squirrely, but they usually tend to go to the top of the list, which will make things quite easy for you. And then also we have that documentation sitting out there that it gives you the step-by-step and some of the background info that we've been discussing here in the webinar.
Great. Christy too asked, on the budget/expense report, it didn't show a direct and indirect total. Why is that?
That was just on the PowerPoint presentation. It actually does have a subtotal for the direct cost, a subtotal for the indirect cost, and then it also even has a subtotal for the cost-sharing cost, and then a project total cost. So all these subtotals are on the report.
Yeah, I just took a very small subsection at the very top of the report, so you couldn't really see the bottom. In hindsight, I probably should have put a little shot of the bottom, but that was actually a really huge report. But like Eddie was saying, you would see those totals at different sections throughout the report.
There are no other questions at this time. Jokester, unfortunately, I don't think this tool is going to help you with world domination, so maybe another PowerPoint.
You never know. OSR will take over the world.
We'll give people a couple more minutes if you're sitting there thinking of a really good question and you're composing. We've got plenty of time. If you've got some more questions, we'll stay on the line for a bit here. Not really seeing anyone typing right now, but if you think of something real quick here, go ahead and type something in. But if not, we're going to go ahead and plan on wrapping it up. Like I said, we'll be posting this webinar out there in a couple days. And do you have a question?
Jean 1 would like to know what happens if your project ID is not found.
When you type in the project ID, if nothing is returned, there's a very good chance that there's one of two things happening. The first thing is you've incorrectly identified a project ID somewhere. There's a typo along that situation. The second thing that can happen is it's in the very newest part of the setup world, because this will show up even if only a budget has been released and no expenditures are completed yet or finalized yet through the ledger. So if no budget has been set up and there are no expenditures, there is no return values for the project ID. So that's the situation. Give it a day or two and look again, or reach out to OSR to check and see if your project has been set up and we may have some other issue. But if you believe it should be there, if you've received your notice of award from the sponsor and the setup email from OSR, You should have something returned in this report.
Okay, we have a question from Pharmacy. So is this the report that will now be required for the project's closeout checklist?
That is exactly correct. This is the report that we are building all of our financial reporting for to the sponsor. A part of the project closeout process is to do a final financial report to the sponsor. And this is required whether we are billing the sponsor based on transactions or billing the sponsor based on some deliverable and they require a financial report. This report is what we're going to use to pull those transactions. It rolls into the new closeout process that we're working to put in place, the new closeout checklist. And if you have transactions that you believe should be a part of your closeout financial report, and they are not listed here, it would be very important for you to reach out to your sponsored program accountant and visit about what's happening there, and if you have something in the budget check error status, if you have something that's not posted yet, it'll be important for us to manage the transactions at that level.
Another question that came in from Vicki. Should the OSR ledger report and the GL expense and budget report match except for encumbrances?
No, they will not match, because just because a transaction has been successfully budget checked, unless it has gone through the entire approval process and the posting process, it will not appear in the OSR GL report. So you may indeed have a disconnect between what sits in the OSR ledger report and what sits in the GL expense report.
And with one caveat to that, typically these reports should be run through the last closed period, which in this case would be September. Through a closed period, yes, the OSR ledger roll-up and this GL OSR report should match.
As long as you look at both through that month only.
Through the same fiscal year period on both reports, they will match, or a ticket will need to be logged. Again, the ledger roll-up is based on KK data, and this GL report is based on the GL official book of record expenses.
Okay, we have a comment from Jean 1. She said I tried entering a project ID that has been active for 6 months and it's not returning the project ID in the reporting system.
I'm not sure the security is completely set up yet, Jean. We do have some scripts that are going to run tonight to push this out. It may be that you have access to the page but not security to run the report appropriately. If you'll give me the project ID, I certainly will try that and see if I can do it. And we are talking about this GL expense report that hits the actuals ledger, just to confirm.
Jean responded, said project ID 5104057. It's the OSR Invoice Listing report.
Oh, the OSR listing, okay. So if she is not seeing any returns in the OSR invoice report, that may mean one of two things. It could mean that invoices for that award have not yet been processed, or it may mean that invoices for that award were not processed with the project information gathered. So that's two different issues around the system and how this report works. So I'll research that one while we're working on some other questions and get right back with you.
Okay, she made a comment, there are a lot of invoices against this project. Thanks for looking into this.
No problem. I agree.
any more questions, please go ahead and type them in. We've got a couple more minutes. We can answer your questions. Otherwise, we'll plan on kind of shutting it down for the day.
This particular project that Jean asked about is a Robert Wood Johnson Award, and Robert Wood Johnson, if I'm in the right place, normally pays up front, and so we don't necessarily have a cost reimbursable invoice relationship with that sponsor. We may do financial reporting, but not invoicing. I do show that one invoice was completed for that sponsor in April of 2016, which is when the award came in with a check. What I'll do is double check on the invoice report and see if we can figure out why that's not returning there. I did have a couple of things come up last week, and we had to run a quick refresh of a couple of records, and we'll check and see what happened with this one as well, Jean. Thanks so much.
We have a question from Jean. Is it possible that this is only good for cost reimbursable grants, such as NIH?
No, our anticipation for this is that it shows all invoices for all projects or contracts that have been processed through the Connect Carolina system. So I would indeed expect to see this invoice that was processed on your Robert Wood Johnson Award. So I will double check and see why that one's not showing back, Jean, and send a note out.
Jean says thank you. She's done with questions.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, if you don't have any more questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank you for attending our webinar today. I know some of you might have wanted to go see the president instead of the webinar, but we're glad we drew your attention instead. I think this will help you do your job a little bit better than going out to see the president, but you know, that would have been cool too. If you know anyone who doesn't maybe hadn't heard about this webinar or is not familiar with it, you can point them to CC Info, where we'll have this webinar and all our training materials out on our website. And you know, like I said, the BI Publisher report will be available tomorrow. So you know, make sure you wait till tomorrow to go look at that report. Thank you.